And you have just been watching a CBS News special report on a press conference out of Los Angeles given by the District Attorney of Los Angeles, along with the police chief, announcing formal charges against Rob Reiner's son, Nick Reiner, for the murders of his father, Rob Reiner, and his wife, Michele. I want to go straight to CBS News correspondent Adam Yamaguchi, who's been following this story since it began over the weekend. Adam, if you want to just remind our viewers what those formal charges are.
Yes, good afternoon, Elizabeth. So yes, the formal charges, the district attorney's office is in the process right now of filing these charges, 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. And what that means is this is elevation of charges due to the fact that there were multiple murders, 2 in this case. There's also a special allegation, which is the use of a knife. Now, this all carries a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole or possibly the death penalty, although the prosecutor's office has not yet determined whether they will seek the death penalty. Nick is currently being held without bail in Los Angeles. And now once these charges are formally filed this afternoon, Nick will have to make an appearance in court after given medical clearance. This is a standard protocol for medical clearance. We're not exactly sure what the timeline is on that. And then comes the arraignment and a plea of guilty or not. Now, after the arraignment, there may be a hearing in which if the defense attorney wants to bring up any mental health issues, that would be addressed at that point.
All right, Adam Yamaguchi, thank you so much. Let's go now to retired FBI special agent and profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole. All right, Mary, let's talk about the exact charges here. 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances because there were multiple murders, and it also the special circumstances have to do with the type of weapon. Can you explain why the type of weapon, a knife, is considered special circumstances when it comes to a murder of this kind?
Sure. So there are several reasons for that, and a knife, especially if that is a knife that Nick brought with him to the home, that it wasn't taken while he was there. He was in a fight with his parents and he grabbed it and the fight escalated. If it was something that indicates that he came there with the intention of seriously harming, if not killing, his parents, that's going to make a difference. And the knife can inflict really painful and unusual damage to the victim. So that becomes very important. And associated with that, during the trial, if it does go to trial, they're going to be looking at the forensic evidence, the crime scene evidence at the scene. There was a mention made earlier that the parents were found in the bedroom. If in fact that's true, and if Nick went in and accosted them when they were very vulnerable and immediately began stabbing them, the forensic evidence at the crime scene will tell the crime scene technicians what happened and how it happened. And that will provide a much more vivid picture, unfortunately, to the jurors to understand what happened. So it's going to be a collection of things. So the prosecutor has to explain, these are the facts, this is the fact pattern, but this is how the crime scene looked, and this is how the crime scene can be interpreted. So even if there likely will be a defense of mental illness or diminished capacity in a crime that was probably quite bloody and probably quite gruesome, at least the possibility exists that that's true, it's going to be very hard to overcome that if the jury looks at the crime scene and looks at the injury pattern that's been caused by a knife. And of course, the type of knife becomes very important as well.
Very little evidence was revealed during that press conference. Both the police chief and the DA said that will be revealed in court eventually. But one of the reporters did ask a question when Nick Reiner was arrested at Exposition Park, which is near the University of Southern California. They asked if there was any evidence of mental illness at that time. I'm curious, though, moving forward, you talked about how mental illness may play a part in this investigation. Can you dive in a little deeper how that would work?
Certainly. So mental illness is not something that you just develop on the night of a homicide. So they'll be looking at past behaviors. They'll be looking at psychological reports that have been completed over the years, if any have been done. They'll be looking at prior behavior that could be indicative of a mental health impairment. But when it comes down to it, even in California, did the offender know the difference between right and wrong, and did they understand the results of their action? So you can have a mental illness, but that doesn't mean that you can commit a murder and then claim that you didn't know what you were doing. So that distinction has to be made here when they do that evaluation. My sense is, if they go with a mental health defense, which seems likely at this point, there will be evaluations of him that will be done both by the defense expert and a prosecution expert. But again, it won't be that all of a sudden on that night they developed this problem that caused them to not know what they were doing and act in a way that was inconsistent with who they are throughout their entire life. So again, it's this office is very well versed in mental illness and defense, so they'll be able to get the best experts and be able to counter those allegations of a mental health defense.
Mary Ellen O'Toole, thank you so much. Thanks so much for your insight. All right, let's go now to CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi. Caroline, Nick Reiner was arrested not long after his parents were both found murdered in their home. What does that tell you about how this case is proceeding so far?
Yeah, and of specific note, he was arrested without incident, meaning he didn't put up a fight. There wasn't anything sort of notable about that. I would just say, going back to talking about a potential insanity defense, everything that your prior guest said is absolutely correct. And I think that had the arrest not been without incident, that could play a part in any potential insanity defense. But also, I would just of note, any insanity defense or a diminished capacity defense or anything involving what we call the mens rea or the state of mind of the defendant at the time, voluntary intoxication cannot be the cause of that switch in state of mind. It's a little more nuanced than that, but essentially, given the defendant's history of addiction and substance abuse issues, we could be looking at potential substances coming into play here. And I would just note that a voluntary intoxication of that sort would not be the type of defense that you could assert in conjunction with a temporary insanity or not guilty by reason of insanity defense. But they are throwing the book at him, Elizabeth. They are going for that top charge of first-degree murder, 2 charges of first-degree murder with special circumstances. You noted the knife makes it a special circumstance. The multiple murders makes it a special circumstance, which means the death penalty is on the table in this case. That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, and I want to lean into that a little bit here, because the DA, Nathan Hochman, said when asked if he would take into consideration the family's wishes when it came to formal charges. You know that he's probably going to be willing to hear what they have to say, but how much would that play into what his job is to seek justice?
Yeah, absolutely. And in any DA's office, they typically do extend that courtesy of talking and with the family, but that's all it is. It's a courtesy. There's nothing, there's no legal obligation that he has to follow the family's wishes in this instance. Also, there could be a schism in the family with how to go about prosecuting this case. They have made it incredibly clear that they are prosecuting this case to the fullest extent possible. These are some of the most serious charges that a district attorney can bring against an individual. It means they believe that he premeditated this act, that he had the mental capacity to understand the act that he was doing. This was not a heat of the moment. In other words, crime, meaning they do not believe that there was some sort of, passionate altercation and that he immediately formed the intent to kill his parents. Rather, they believe it was premeditated, meaning he had planned this for a while. He went there with potentially the murder weapon. So those are all things that they will bring up in this prosecution if it does go to trial. I personally think this is a case that is very ripe for a plea deal.
Might not go to trial, but he's certainly hired a very high-profile attorney, Alan Jackson. Really interesting choice. If you wouldn't mind just reminding our viewers, we've heard his name several times this year, actually in the past few years, for his high-profile clients.
Yeah, he's fresh off that win, the Karen Reed trial, defeating a second-degree murder charge for Karen Reed. He's defended Kevin Spacey, Harvey Weinstein. He's a really well-known criminal defense attorney in LA and quite frankly, in the country. And he knows the intricacies of that DA's office. He will know how and when potentially to show his hand, as it were, in terms of what potential evidence he may have of credible defenses here. We don't know if there, is potentially a self-defense defense. I mean, there are a number of defenses that could still acknowledge that he committed the crime, but
Sure.
that could essentially absolve him of guilt. Self-defense, imperfect self-defense, not guilty by reason of insanity, diminished capacity, those types of defenses. And Alan Jackson certainly will be going through with a fine-tooth comb. I think certainly there will be substantial doctor testimony involved if they proceed in that vein. A substantial amount of medical evidence would need to come in order to assert most of those defenses.
Caroline Polisi, always great to see you. Thank you so much for that insight.